Well, thank you for doing this, my brother. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are getting you back in town now. You're going to be doing this thing that has been billed as the Unpredictable Tour. What is in store for fans? What can you predict of this unpredictable event?
Well, the way it works is we've got a list of probably about 80 songs that we can play from memory, and I give the band the first song, and then after that, I just start calling out tunes depending on my mood and the sense that I get from the audience of where they'd like to go, and 2 hours later, we're finished.
That works. I like it. Describe the band that you're toting along with you.
It's my usual band of minstrels. It's Prairie Prince on drums, Chasm Sultan on the bass, Jesse Gress on guitar, and Greg Hawkes on keyboards. And it's been that lineup, except for minor changes, for about 30 years, I think, almost.
And some of those cats are the cats that you played alongside in when, and I don't know if a lot of people might remember when you briefly did the New Cars, right? Some of those names are familiar, certainly Greg. And
yeah, we're like 4/5 of the New Cars,
right, exactly.
As a matter of fact. The only one who isn't on stage is Elliot Easton, so we could whip into some New Cars pretty easily, but like I say, it's unpredictable, so you never know.
Right. You still working the Ringo Starr's All-Star gig? That was the last time that you were in Honolulu, right? Election night, 2016, that fabled evening.
Yeah, the horror. Actually, it wasn't the last time I toured with Ringo. He did a brief tour at the end of 2017, and that was the last time I played with him.
Okay, right. No, I was saying that was the last time you were in town here for us.
Yeah, that was pretty much near the end.
Are you still working with Ringo?
I'm no longer a regular All-Star. I suppose once an All-Star, always an All-Star, but I was replaced by Colin Hay from Men at Work. And Richard Page was also replaced by somebody else. I'm trying to remember exactly who. He was one of the guys from 10cc.
I get you. Well, it doesn't matter. Now that you're not in the band, we don't care, Todd.
We just don't care anymore. It was actually fine with me. After 5 years, I'd had enough of playing the same set every single night.
Right, I get you.
Despite that it's fun to hang out with the guys, for me, that starts to drive me crazy.
I can imagine. Even if it's your favorite band, when you're like, all right, after 3 nights of this, I don't think I can take another one with you.
Let alone 5 years of it.
Right, exactly, totally. And when we, one time I talked to you when it was part of that tour, and you talked a little bit about how the Beatles connected to your youth, but in general, one thing we never got into was, for such a musical guy, take us all the way back to how does music begin to affect you as a young person that led to you picking up instruments?
Well, some of my first recollections are musical. My family had one of these little RCA 45 RPM players. Very familiar if you grew up in that era. Mm-hmm. They only played, you could stack like maybe 845s on it, and they would play them in sequence. And I just used to spend hours with that, especially these light classical records by the Boston Pops, like Chicken Reel and the Skater's Waltz and stuff like that. And the records were printed on clear colored vinyl, so I would stare through the records while I was listening to something, and I always associated that sort of kind of looking at things through different lenses while you're listening to music, sort of like changing your reality in a way. And as soon as there were music lessons available in my elementary school, I signed up for that. First instrument I wanted to learn how to play was the flute for some reason. I just like the sound of it, but it was too difficult for somebody my age. The combination of the embouchure and the non-linear way that it was fingered sort of threw me. So I did better on my sister's clarinet than I did on the flute. But eventually I got hung up on the guitar and music that my contemporaries were playing. How was that?
Yeah, was it just because you saw people playing it? Somebody else got one? What was it that opened?
It was an era of the guitar, ascending in a way. The guitar and rock and roll were kind of like of a piece.
Yep.
And so there were a lot of instrumental music. There was like Dwayne Eddy. He was like a handsome young star, and he never sang. All he did was play the guitar. There was the Ventures. I think the thing that really got me obsessed was Walk, Don't Run by the Ventures. That was when I started really pestering my parents about getting a guitar. They got me, like a guitar that came with 3 months' worth of lessons. So you can imagine what quality it was. And I suffered through the 3 months of lessons, and then after that, I taught myself everything else. So.
How far between that and when you do... Naz was the very first band, right? How old were you when you do that?
Naz, I was 18 when I started the Naz. I had a high school band, and we played a few little, frat parties and things like that. But when high school ended, everybody went off to other schools, and I wasn't going to school, so I went off to find a band to play in, and I was in a blues band in Philadelphia for about 8 months, I guess.
Before the Naz?
Yeah, that was before the Naz, and when that broke up, I decided I wanted to form a, quote, super group, and I stole guys from all the other local bands, and that's how the Naz came about.
And at that time, because I wasn't even born yet, and I grew up outside of Philly. Were cheesesteaks already like a big thing in Philly then, or no? Had that?
Well, cheesesteaks were a thing as long as I can remember.
Okay.
Although even before that, it was the hoagie.
Right. Right. Of course.
The hoagie was, the tuna fish hoagie was the official sandwich of Philadelphia.
The tuna fish hoagie. I love it.
And then the cheesesteak became more popular. I mean, hoagie didn't require you to cook anything.
Right. No, that's good. Very good point on that. I never even thought of the economics on that front. And the first gig that I think is really kind of cool. When we just had John McLaughlin on, and he was talking about Mahavishnu's very first gig was opening for John Lee Hooker. And I'm looking at your thing. I know, right? That's pretty ballsy. Your first gig with Naz, unless I'm reading it wrong, was opening for the Doors.
Yeah, that was before we even got signed. The Doors were playing like Town Hall in Philadelphia, and we were the hot local band, so we got to open up for them.
Wow.
I think we did all kinds of ridiculous things like throwing fruit into the audience, anything to get attention.
Right.
And then the Doors came on, and I was kind of into the Doors, but I thought Jim Morrison was kind of weird, especially when he fell down dead on the stage and just laid there for like 5 minutes.
That's some funny stuff. Wow, that's a great first gig. And did you get to interact with him at all, or was that one of those things where not really?
Not really. They were West Coast and we were East Coast. It was like the Sharks and the Jets.
Yeah, I can dig it. Oil and water, for no question.
Yeah,
about the
some ways.
About the difference.
All our influences were like the Who and the Yardbirds, and all bands from England. And that whole sort of UCLA poetry scene didn't mean much to us.
It's cool when we think about these other groups, a side of you that I've also never talked about, and it relates to that era too. You got to do a lot of production of other people. What led to you, like, I'm looking at like some of these credits here, Grand Funk Railroad, we're an American band. Like, how did you end up getting that gig?
Well, it was at a transitional point for the band. They had previously been managed and produced by a guy named Terry Knight. And he was a good manager in that he got them, lots of publicity. At one point they had like the biggest billboard that had ever been at Times Square. But he was a terrible record producer. And so the band didn't get a lot of respect for their records, and they were looking to change that. So they had new management, and management knew that I was into production, and I was kind of hot at the time. So they put us together, and the end result was We're an American Band, which was a record that produced the top 10 single, right. And that's what the band wanted. So
totally
worked out well.
Yeah, and a big change for them too. Very much more radio friendly. And what made you hot? Like, when did you first? What were some of the first ones you did? And how did you make that transition yourself into doing those kinds of doing production instead of just making your own tunes?
Well, when the Nas broke up, I wasn't interested in repeating that thing. I never adapted to the politics of being in a band. And I didn't feel like I didn't have that sort of, exhibitionistic streak that makes you want to be a front man. So I decided that I would get into record production instead for a while, because it allowed me to still be associated with the music, but I wouldn't have to deal with being in a band and going on the road and all that other stuff. So I guess the first big thing that I did was stage fright. After I had engineered the Jesse Winchester album for Bearsville, and that was produced by Robbie Robertson. And they liked what I did on that, so they asked me to run the board for Stage Fright.
The band we're talking about.
Yeah, the band. And the band were the biggest band in the world at that point, so that elevated my name right away. And I think the next important thing that happened after that was maybe Badfinger.
Right, Badfinger.
Who had actually had two other versions of the album essentially either be rejected or fall apart before they could be finished. So I went over and I did the record in 10 days, and they had 2 hit singles off of it. And as a result, everybody started to think of me as like this whiz kid who could solve all your problems.
Right, and that's a good lead into how you ended up being a good choice for the Grand Funk to do something different. And finally, before we wrap it up, one of the other names in that era, and I know that my understanding is the record didn't end up, like you did some sessions and then somebody else ended up doing what would be the record, but your resume includes getting to work with Janis Joplin.
Well, I got sent out to, after Janis had left essentially Big Brother, and she signed as an artist with Albert Grossman, who was also my manager. And so he decided to send me out to Marin County, where she was living, and try and supervise the process of putting a band together and selecting material for the first record. And I had never sort of worked with an artist like Janis before. I mean, there are people who are apprehensive of the studio. They get nervous when they get in the studio. But I get the sense that Janis just didn't really like being in the studio. She didn't have an audience to respond to what she was doing. And she kind of depended on that to guide her. And so it was a very difficult process trying to, get her to focus on that part. The details and stuff like that were not what interested her. She just wanted to find a song she liked and sing it. And at some point, someone in the Albert Grossman office who was in publishing and writing songs or something said, okay, I got this song, and we're going to make Janis do it. And we're going to make Todd produce it, and we're going to make the Butterfield band to be essentially the backup. So it was this weird one-off kind of edict that came down from the Bearsville offices, like right in the middle of the process of trying to put together her band and get ready to do an album. And, we did one session, and the session was, we got through it, but it was kind of lackluster for all the reasons that I've articulated. The fact that Janice is not comfortable in the studio.
Right.
And as it turned out, I didn't do what was necessary to make her comfortable, because I was not used to, kind of having to focus more psychologically on the artist than musically. Most everything else was like musical challenges, and this was a psychological challenge.
What was that song?
And it was called One Night Stand.
Okay. Continue.
And so the session, we went through the first obligatory 3 hours, and then nobody seemed very excited about it, so we just essentially called it after that. And so that song was around until after she died, and then it got released as, sort of a posthumous fragment of her final years, I guess.
Amazing. And no good memories, really? No funny stories with her?
Well, I mean, funny, like strange, like where the process of, reviewing the songs and putting the band together involved, like every sort of famous songwriter of the time coming through her house in Marin to show the band the song and hopefully show her the song. There would be like John Hall and Nick Gravenites and all these other, blues and folk people and others who would write, songs appropriate for her. And then one day we get a call on the phone and it's Janice, and she says, "I'm sorry, I can't be there right now. I'm at the police station dealing with something, blah, 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 blah." 5 minutes later, I walk by her bedroom door, and the bedroom door is open, and she's in bed. She'd called from her own bedroom to say that she was at the police station and couldn't make it to the session. I think that's how much, she just wasn't comfortable with the process.
That's a great story. That's a high quality one. I don't think we can get a better one out of you on that session.
No, I don't think so.
It's Todd Rundgren. He's got so many stories. We could sit here and milk him for stories, and we'd both be old and gray. He's going to be doing a couple of nights at the Blue Note. We're really stoked. Would you do a follow up when you're in town, or do you want to be left alone when you're here?
Well, I live on Kauai, so I can do a follow-up when I'm there, as long as it doesn't interfere with me getting home, because I haven't been home for like 3 months.
I'll deal with your people, but if we can do it right at the venue, I'd come over there and grab it, make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, we can probably do that,
I really enjoyed talking to you, Todd, and thanks for all the great stories today. It was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed talking about some of them.
No, my pleasure. Aloha, it's your pal Todd Rundgren here on All Things Considered with my friend Dave Lawrence. And we need your help. Please make a pledge now. And thanks for supporting HPR.
Love it. Appreciate it. Grateful. Giving you a high five. I will talk to Paul, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Feel good. And thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it, brother.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.